I'm Jason Sylvia, and this is the Creative Capital Show. A show about creative people and how those creative people turn into entrepreneurs by taking their creativity and turning it into a business and facing all the trials and tribulations along the way. What happens to a dream deferred? Well, if you're Kyle Therrien, the answer is a lot. Kyle is a producer, engineer, musician, and last but certainly not least, owner and founder of Railroad Park Recording Company. Kyle in his early days developed a love for the grind and the journey rather than the destination. And that journey took him to some pretty interesting places. In this episode, Kyle talks about starting a band, being a roadie, going on the road in your teens, being signed to an indie label in the UK, getting on the Warped Tour, hustling music and merch, performing market research through MySpace, the digital revolution within the music industry, and finally, what happens when you sacrifice your life for a dream and that dream doesn't turn out the way you planned. And it all started with finessing the public education system. Enjoy. So Kyle, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
The pleasure is all mine, Jason. I'm excited.
It's been a long time coming. We were talking about this for a while, and now you finally got some time out of the studio where you can actually sit down and have this conversation. So I'm excited because this is some subjects near and dear to my heart as far as like music, audio production, and things like that. But for those who are listening, hopefully I've got listeners outside of Rhode Island. Not to say I'm not hating on the fact that I've got a ton of listeners in Rhode Island and Providence. I love all of you. But if this ever blows up, or listeners in Massachusetts, or listeners outside of Massachusetts, or just anywhere in the world that are listening to this, who are you? Brief description and just what exactly is it that you do?
Yes, so I am a musician, and I am an engineer and a producer, and I like to call myself an entrepreneur as well, or a business owner. Those are kind of the hats that I wear. And I'm not going to lie, I was a little nervous about coming on because one thing I have learned about you is you have an extensive knowledge of things in regards to film and pop culture and music. And I was a little intimidated because the way my life is, and the way my life's been going for the last 3 years is I've essentially been in sort of a bubble. And everything, I've been working 12 hours a day at least every single day for the last 3 years, building a brand, building a business, and also being an artist that I feel like I've been in a vacuum. So I feel like I kind of missed out on a lot of things that have happened in regards to film and pop culture and all this stuff. So I was a little intimidated because I was like, man, Jason could run circles around me.
Well, that
in a conversation.
I appreciate that, but that ability, at least right now, is not paying me money. So if you want to switch, hey, I'm down. But by the way, what is that brand and that thing you've been building? Just real quick, we'll get into it later. But what is the name of that, just so people know?
Yeah. So currently, my life's work is a business called Railroad Park Recording Company. And it's based in Massachusetts, southern Massachusetts, right over the Rhode Island border line. And it is primarily a recording studio, but also a brand and also a lifestyle or a lifestyle brand, if you will. And hopefully, sooner rather than later, a label, or at least some type of mechanism that can really help artists. And I like to think that we are helping a lot of local artists right now, but I'm crazy and my goals are nothing short of world domination. So I am hoping to sort of from a beach town in southern Massachusetts, sort of like I don't know, flip the music industry on its back again, or do some really big shit, you know?
So with that being said, I think it's a perfect segue. So this world domination aspect, would that mean like you're an evil genius? Because the first question I got is, you graduated high school a year early.
Dude, yes. I graduated high school a year early, and that was in the middle of my history of tricking schools, because I tricked my elementary school, and I graduated elementary school a year early, and then I went and tricked my high school and graduated high school a year early.
Well, the high school one I knew about. The grade school one, how did you pull off the grade school graduating early? You're just like, let me take this cognitive test. I'm a genius, or like, were your parents like, he's a genius, just let him test it out?
So I'm a very interesting cat, because like,
Hence why you're on the show.
and I don't have any problem admitting that. I'm not trying to sound arrogant, but like, you know, you get to a certain age where you really start to reflect on. You really get to reflect on some of the choices that you've made growing up, and how it's panned out versus what society and your parents told you was what you were supposed to do.
And mine have all been wrong.
Well, elementary school, funny enough, I actually got expelled. I got expelled because I was at the bus stop, and I had like one of those neighborhoods, you know, where there was a lot of kids in the neighborhood, and we were playing hockey and manhunt, and like this was before smartphones and all that. So we were a pretty tight knit kind of group of like knuckleheads in the neighborhood. And anyway, somebody gave me some marijuana. This is also prior to the legalization and all that. So somebody gave me some marijuana, and I did what any young potential entrepreneur would do, and I brought it to school and sold it immediately.
So the entrepreneurial prowess was early. It was early. Yes. You already had that. You already had that going.
So I sold it, and of course that kid got caught, and he ratted me out, and so I was expelled. I was probably the first person to ever get expelled, because they like really made a example of me. Anyway, I got expelled, but as a kid, I was never I was pretty punk rock, and I never was interested in doing anything people told me to do. So school, homework, I brushed by with like B's and C's and D's, just did the bare minimum to get through it, because I didn't want to be there. But I wasn't a dumb kid by any means. Like, I had forged relationships with all my teachers, like great relationships with all my teachers, and all the teachers would always say that, like, although I didn't always show up, and although I didn't do my work and respect my tasks, I was always polite and non-interruptive, and so I forged great relationships with my teachers. And one of my math teachers was like, "Hey, you're a good kid, and you just got mixed up in something silly. So what I'm going to do is have been in the process of setting up this tutoring program, and I'm going to kind of guinea pig you into it, because now you basically have to go to a different elementary school for your last year of schooling." And basically was like, I'm going to propose this idea. He came and he sat with my parents. He sat with the superintendent, and he developed this program based around, I guess, me getting expelled, where he liked me. I was a great kid. We had great conversations, and all the time, me and this great teacher. And so he set it up so that my senior year of, well, not my senior year, but my 8th grade year, the last year of elementary school, I basically went to school for 3 hours a day at UMass Dartmouth and got tutored by like 2 babe college students for a max of 3 hours a day. So I got expelled from this school that required me to wake up at 7 in the morning and be there for 8 hours. And basically got put into a program where I went to school for 3 hours a day, where me and these college kids would just laugh and have a great time and just talk about whatever, and then I tested out. And I really do feel like it was hacking the elementary school the system, because I literally woke up at noon and went to school till 3 p.m.
Did this person already have that program in mind, and then just kind of needed like a use case, and then you came on as like,
think so,
perfect? Yeah. Or did they come up with it?
It started as a tutoring program, like an after school type thing. And I think the teacher wanted to develop it into sort of a...
So it was already happening, but they wanted to scale it up, and then they needed like a proof of concept, and then you came on and you became the proof of concept.
Yes.
Basically like, hey, I need a way to show that this works. oh, hey, look, here we go.
Yeah. So I skipped out on a whole bunch of like testing and all these types of responsibilities that you have as a young adult, finalizing your elementary school experience, and then I was legally not allowed on the property because I was selling drugs apparently. So, and then fast forward to high school, that was a real hack for sure. I mean, elementary school that was my elementary school hack, but high school was a huge hack. And to make a long story short, basically, same sort of thing. Forged great relationships with my teachers because I'm a kind person, and flew by the seat of my pants with C's and D's and B's. And then basically it came down to PE. I didn't participate. I was like chilling in the bleachers with the girls every PE. Like didn't even change, and it caught up to me, and it just so happened to create this perfect storm sort of situation where I was like short a few credits to graduate high school. Going and this was before senior year, whatever. What is it? Junior year? That's before that. I don't even remember.
It's junior then senior.
Okay, so yeah, junior year, and so I basically, because I kind of like didn't really do anything in PE, I basically wasn't going to pass high school, and I was going to have to stay back, which is like, when you're that age, that is like that's social suicide, right? Like you having to stay back and be in another and be.
It's like, dude, just let me run a mile or some shit, and then like call
yeah, exactly. Like, so anyway, I was on my way to the guidance counselor's office to discuss my situation with the guidance counselor, and I get to the office, and the secretary's like, he's got a couple people in there, just sit. And then the guidance counselor came out. Oh, hey, Kyle, I was going to be a couple minutes here. While you sat here, why don't you fill out these scholarships? Because it was all about scholarships going in, as junior year's wrapping up. And I'm like, yeah, sure. Grab a pen. I just start filling out these scholarships just to pass the time. And then finally calls me into his office. I go sit into his office, and he goes, oh, I'll take those applications. And the one that was on the top of the stack, he goes, oh, you're interested in going to NEIT? And I'm like, sure. And he goes, oh, well, they have a program where we get to choose 2 students from the high school every year that get to spend their senior year of high school in college.
I wish my high school had that program. Holy crap.
Yeah, so you would basically, I went for my freshman year of college, and I took like 2 additional classes, an English and a math, to get the credits that I needed to graduate senior year. But essentially, that after my junior year was finished, everybody went into their senior year of high school, and I went to my freshman year of college. Not only did I go to my freshman year of college and get to skip out on spending my senior year in a public school, but I also didn't have to take SATs. I didn't have to take SATs because I filled out this scholarship. So I didn't have to do final projects, SATs. A lot of my teachers were actually quite upset because I got to like really just peace out. And I'm getting college credits. I'm in my first year of college. So everybody gets out senior year and goes into their freshman year of college. And had I gone back, I'd be getting my bachelor's.
So quick segue from all of that.
And it all started because I was failing out of high school.
How lucky do you think you were because that you had like teachers and people that did see you as like, oh, like, no, he's a good kid? Because not everybody gets that. Even if they try to like, you do that, not everybody gets that benefit of the doubt, or like they do one thing and they get labeled a certain way, or if they're just in a school environment, whether it's grade school, high school, or whatever have you, that's just not good. It's negative, or for whatever reason, right?
Yeah.
So how important do you think it was that you had like teachers and adults and people that were like had your back and like were encouraging you rather than like just labeling you something and being like, that's it?
Yeah, well, I do think to an extent a lot of life is sort of 50% hard work and 50% luck, or the universe, or whatever you want to call it. I definitely recognize that I was dealt a good card, when I was born, essentially, because really one thing right off the rip that none of us can control or have any say in is kind of where and what situation we're born into. So I was lucky enough to be born into to a fantastic mother who I didn't really know my dad, but and don't get me wrong, I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth by any means, but I had a fantastic mother. And she was incredibly ambitious and incredibly smart. She went to school full time, worked full time, and was a mother full time to me. And I had great grandparents. So I like to think that right off the rip, they kind of prepared me with the skills that enabled me to sort of hack through elementary and hack through high school because, like I said, teachers didn't dislike me, even though I didn't really achieve much in terms of school and schoolwork, but they loved me because I had great conversations with. I just really connected with teachers because that's just the type of person that I am. Like I like to think that I'm warm and kind, or at least try my best to be a good person. And so I don't know. I guess my upbringing and my parents, my grandparents, and sort of the people that surrounded me when I was a young kid, kind of instilled with me these skills. To be kind, or I don't know if it's a skill really, but like whatever it is, to be kind and to be warm and to be a good person. And I think, being kind and being warm and being a good person, it's done a lot for me. It's been sort of, it's made it so that I do stumble upon these situations where it seems to be luck,
Were you an only child?
I wasn't an only child until I have a stepsister. She's much younger than me though, so there's quite a gap between us. So most of my childhood I was an only child.
Same. So I'm just wondering if like that might have something to do with it, just because I feel like if you're an only child, like you have to develop like talking to and having conversations with adults, I feel a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's I don't think there's any scientific,
to enjoy your own company.
Yeah, scientific data behind it, but just from my own experiences, like as you were saying that, I'm like, I wonder if he was an only child, just because that would add up a little bit, because then you have to be able to talk to adults, because
it makes sense.
There's you and the adults in the room, and that's it.
Yeah, I've never thought about that, but that is a great point. And I think one thing you learn as being an only child is like really enjoying your own company. And I actually think that that's really helpful in navigating life, because I do feel like a lot of my friends growing up, they sort of were hungry for or thirsty for other people's attention and other people's time, and I feel like they got themselves in some silly situations quite often because they were so heavily influenced by other people. And I think if you really enjoy your own company, like, I don't know if you're this type of person, but I am the type of person that could like go for a walk by myself or spend an entire day by myself and absolutely love it. I truly do enjoy my own company. So like,
I could do that, but I need people around sometimes just to like either affirm certain things, or it's just like kind of bored. Like I'm very introverted. I need to bounce like ideas off people. So there we go. We just figured out something else. If you're an only child, it doesn't necessarily mean you're introverted or extroverted. It could go either way. Either way, ladies and gentlemen. So they're breaking through the nature or nurture argument unintentionally on the fucking show. We're like, start calling up the side. Screw the medical scientists. Like, we know what we're talking about. Anyway, please don't do that. That's not a good idea. Going along with the high school thing, you graduated early, went to New England Tech, but something else I noticed is that as I'm doing my research for the show, I'm starting to find out more and more as I do this show that, like, in an episode that has yet to premiere yet, but somebody said, like, dude, what are you, the feds? Like, because, like, I would bring up stuff, and they're like, how did you know that? I take that as a compliment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But one thing I did notice is that in high school, you're doing video editing on with Cubase, which, for those that don't know, that was one of the early, I think it's still around, DAWs, digital audio workstations, computer recording software.
It's still around. It's still great.
Okay, so I just didn't know if it was still around or not, or if it changed its name or something. In high school, you're doing that. Was that happening more from your, as we know from grade school, you're not, you have an entrepreneurial spirit. So was that more of an entrepreneurial spirit thing? Was that more of a punk rock ethos, punk rock mindset thing of like DIY? Or was it, you're at grade school and high school and things like that, those are like your formative years. Was it more of, and please talk about this too, like your musical influences, because you were playing like in the schools, like, classical band and things like that, but you were probably playing in your own band, or at least in the early formations of it as well. So what influenced you wanting to do like video and audio editing? Was it entrepreneurial? Was it, DIY, like kind of punk rock attitude? Was it because you were doing music already? And if it was because you were doing music, was it because of like the things that you were like listening to?
Yeah. So basically, I was like your typical kid, like into sports when I was really young, and punk rock sort of ruined that for me. As I started listening to like Green Day, and I got a guitar, and my closest friends, same thing, and we decided that we wanted to start a band before we even knew how to play instruments. We like literally assigned, like, he was like, I want to play bass because it seems the easiest, and I was like, fine, that means I'm a guitar player. We actually, as far back as middle school, we were collecting. We would go around the lunch tables with a hat, like collecting tips so that we could raise money to buy gear so that we could start a band.
Was it like that sitcom trope where you book a gig but none of you know how to play a damn song?
It's exactly what it was.
Oh, please tell me about that, because that sounds amazing. But
Yeah.
like, I always see that in a sitcom where like the main character and his friends decide to start a band and they do everything besides learning how to play the damn instruments.
It was very much that. I mean, we were just like, me and my closest friend, my best friend, really. We were so into like Blink-182 and into punk, and from Blink-182 we would like watch interviews of Blink-182, and like whatever shirts they were wearing, we would check those bands out. So it'd be like the Get Up Kids, and like we quickly became into Warped Tour and punk rock, and we sort of developed that punk rock mentality, which is perfect. We're angsty young kids, but I was pretty popular in school, you know what I mean? When I was younger, I got along with everybody. Kind of same thing. Got along with my teachers really well, and so kids were really they were like, "Oh, you're starting a band? That's so cool. Here's the rest of my lunch money. Like, go for it." And we raised a bunch of money. We got a bunch of gear, and we played the talent show in middle school. And it must have been god awful, but like luckily we were popular enough, and the only kids with guitars like playing band music. That people are like, oh wow, they're doing the thing. So we end up making the talent show. I didn't get to play it because I got expelled. Whatever. But then going into high school, I did my first tour at 16 years old, and what happened was that evolved. We even though we sucked, we pushed really hard to learn how to play our instruments and to learn how to write music, and then going into high school.
And what was the name of that band?
Oh man. You're going to do that to me. All right, it was called Another Option, which is a terrible name, but we were kids. And it was pretty...
I've heard a lot worse, so don't.
We were pretty popular in school. Like, there's some band rivalries and everything, but we started setting up shows. We started playing shows. The drummer of our band's mom had a minivan, was driving us to shows. We were the youngest kids at the shows, and I did my first tour at 16 because I got my first car. And we had been setting up these local shows for touring bands, because what happened is, you know, back then there was always bands coming through the area. Shows were getting canceled on them. They were looking for shows last second. So even as a young kid, MySpace is starting to pop, and bands are on MySpace and they're networking with other bands. And basically we had like a Grange Hall in town and a high school, and we would set up shows at VFWs and whatnot. And we would host these touring bands who were, you know, maybe not even up and coming, but they were touring. Because back then, this was before iTunes and Spotify and streaming. You know, the only way to climb the ranks and become sort of a full-time musician, or famous, if you will, was to kind of like have a rigorous touring schedule and to be like literally out in the world touring. So when I got my first car, we'd already forged these relationships with these touring bands, and there was a band from New Hampshire, and they were like, hey, would you like to go on tour with us? And we're like, yeah, like, how do we make this work? And we set it up so that basically they already had a tour booked, and they were like, whatever, we'll just have you guys go on and do a 20-minute set with our gear before we play. Because basically in my Chevy Malibu, my first car, we followed their van and trailer, and we used their gear. So we had a Chevy Malibu with our guitars and stuff in the trunk, and we would follow this band to the gigs. We would help them set up, and we would play 20 minutes worth of music before they went on for their set. And here we are, 16-year-old kids playing all across the Midwest, Chicago, and all that stuff. That was my first.
So I know you graduated high school early, but like, how did the other kids in the band get to do that? And like,
it was a summer.
Also, like, how did you present that to the parents? Or like, were there ever any, or were there like that? I want to hear about, like, how did you convince that? And then also, were there ever any venues? Because I know like there are certain venues that are like 18 plus or 21 plus. Like,
yeah.
Were there any ever
some crazy venues?
I was gonna say, were there ever any venues that they're like, dude, you're not getting in. I don't care if you're with the band. Like, this is 18 plus or 21. Like, how did you skirt around that?
So I remember the first the first gig was in Pennsylvania. It was a coffee shop in this fucking buttfuck town in the middle of Pennsylvania. It was a town called Montrose, and it was a coffee shop. So they were serving alcohol, and it was all kids. But the most amazing thing is, here it is. This is our first show out of state, essentially. And we're in Pennsylvania, and we're like, oh, this is cool. And we played, and we were lucky. We were lucky because, A, there was hundreds of kids there in this town. They had nothing better to do, you know? And B, these kids were here for it. Like, they were like, whoa, these guys are from Massachusetts. Like, whoa. And like, we played and these kids went crazy. And immediately I was in love with touring and playing music. Like, we played, these kids went crazy. They were moshing, they were crowd surfing, they were buying all of our merch. And like the first night we were making money. And I was just like, man, I'm in love with this. And then the second gig we played at a place called Suds and More. It was in Ohio. I don't know if it was in Cleveland or Columbus or somewhere in Ohio. I remember being in the city.
It sounds like the best/worst car wash ever.
Suds and More was a venue on one side and a laundromat on the other side, but not like disconnected with a wall or anything. Like, it was literally, we're playing to a crowd of kids, and behind those kids are washing machines and people washing their clothes.
I feel like somebody needs to now make that a speakeasy bar. Like, you have to like open up like the dryer, but you have to open up the right one and like crawl through, and that's how you get to the bar. Like, it's an actual
or you're
working
in a boutique sneaker shop.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, like bodega, literally, like, you have to go through this laundromat, but like it's just a regular laundromat, and then you have to like pick the exact right dryer, and then you have to like crawl through it, or you have to like hit something on like the little keypad for it, and then it opens a door. Anyway, sorry, there you go. We're giving out business ideas here. Speakeasy, bar, or sneaker shop.
I just want to mention that gig was terrible. In fact, they wanted us to go on at 2 a.m, like everything, your quintessential like show gone wrong, promoter don't care. And the band that we were with, they actually took a shit in one of the washing machines. And that, like, right as we were leaving, was that due to drunkenness or hatred for the gig? Nope, he was completely sober, but he was so mad that like the person promoting the show would put on these touring bands at like 2 a.m, which if you're a touring band that doesn't really have a following in Ohio,
it's like, what are we doing?
A lot of these shows were the way they worked was, it was local bands setting up gigs, throwing the touring artist in the middle, and basically giving the touring bands an opportunity to play in their town to their following. You know what I mean? So it was a beautiful sort of just a network of kids being good to kids. You know what I mean? Like, hey, there's a band coming from out of town. Let's put them right in the middle of the set so that the bands before we might catch some of their following, and then the band after will catch some of their following. It was a great system, but the second show, they didn't get the memo, and we were supposed to, I think we didn't even perform. We were like, fuck this, we're not playing at 2 a.m. I busked outside of a club and made $70, while the drummer of the band that was nice enough to take us on tour took a shit in the washing machine. I don't remember what the question was, but
no, you answered it, but it also, so correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you broke into the industry in the way of basically you found another band that was further along, and you're like, hey, let us follow you, and you'll get us as roadies, and in exchange for us being roadies for you, and you don't have to set up your own stuff, like, let us play 20 minutes and get some of the cash.
And that band loved hanging out with us. We were like, really, we forged a great relationship. We were good friends, so they were happy to take us out. It meant that like all those hours spent hanging out in a parking lot somewhere, it was now with buddies.
But you offered it up basically, or like you and your band offered it up, and almost like as like an unpaid internship, but you weren't getting paid. But you basically offered up like, hey, we have these resources, we can help you out. And I'm guessing you weren't expecting money or expecting anything, and then all of a sudden they're like, hey, come on tour. So there you go, folks, like how to break in the industry. It doesn't have to offer something up or offer services. I know I've heard Gary Vaynerchuk and others talk about this, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like this free. That's a whole other thing I want to talk about too later on. It doesn't have to be necessarily this unpaid internship thing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be money either. It can be, but it can be other things. So that's really interesting.
But from there, I was so in love with touring that I would then spend the rest of my life till now making music and touring.
I'm just think you guys are lucky that you are also able to convince not like one, but multiple parents of multiple kids to be like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Like, go on a tour.
Oh, and it took some convincing and whatnot, but if there's one thing that I've learned, on that comment that you made about Gary Vaynerchuk and hustle culture, or like the idea is that you need to do these unpaid internships. I think unpaid internships and putting in more work than you're being paid for is inevitable. But I think the really important thing is to kind of know when it's time to start making money. And that can
knowing
be difficult.
your worth and not just accepting somebody not paying you, because you should get something out of it.
But even knowing your worth, in my opinion, isn't enough, because I feel like there's a market, and you have to be respectful of that market. And unfortunately, in the music world especially, or in the music world especially, sometimes it doesn't matter what you're worth, and sometimes you're just going to make less than what you're worth. And I think balancing what's a healthy amount of that is important.
And is there an exchange of energy? Like, are you getting something out of this, or is it literally they're getting free labor and you're getting nothing? Like, or they keep like dangling the carrot, like, hey, we're gonna help you out, and then they never do. It's
payment
like,
is not always monetary.
Yeah, like as at what point do you have to realize, like, I'm getting nothing out of this, like I'm wasting my time here, where I could be somewhere else, maybe doing the same thing, and maybe not monetarily getting paid, but they're giving me something in exchange for my time and my energy.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to go into that. I got a question related to that, but going from, high school, you went on tour and you got addicted to touring. You're like, I want to do more of this. So you had another option, you're touring. And another option, as you're doing the touring life and things like that, another option morphed into a different band name, or it's the evolution of another option became War Games. Mm-hmm. So what caused that evolution? And if you could talk about, like, how long were you touring? Because when you became War Games, some pretty big things happened, but like, what was that? Like, how long did you have to grind, and what did you have to go through to get to that point? And like, why War Games? Why the evolution? Things like that. 'Cause I think that's an important part of your history.
Yeah. So War Games came around in 2012. So up until then, we're probably looking at 5-6 years of another option. And another option, we had done UK tours, and that's what led me to drop out of college.
How'd you get the UK tour?
Yeah, so a friend of ours had an indie label, and he was interested in like trying to get American bands into the UK, which at the time and I think always has sort of a thriving indie rock and underground and alternative scene. Like, I feel like England is like, in America you put Top 40 Radio on and you hear the same like Taylor Swift songs, where I feel like in the UK you put Top 40 Radio on and you hear Taylor Swift, but then you also hear like alternative bands that you would never hear on American radio.
And there's a history of pirate radio in the UK, or like UK's like pop music or musical history of like taking bands or genres that in America weren't being appreciated. They're like, or did UK and Europe at large, like, hey, we'll bring you over here. So was that kind of the case, or was it like, hey, we're doing good, and all of a sudden your friend from the UK was like, come over here?
I think this gentleman, this promoter, and who owned this indie label, was getting a little frustrated with like the scene, because I think this was probably around the time where CDs were being phased out and Napster was a thing, and like, all of a sudden everybody in the industry was kind of scurrying to figure out, hey, how do we monetize the music industry? Big labels were starting to crash, and it was chaos. And I could be wrong, but maybe he looked at like going to the UK as a way to like to be respected over here for doing such for manifesting such an achievement, but also being able to tap into this market that just seems to, from the outside looking in, British folks and people of the United Kingdom just, I don't know. I mean, they really seem to enjoy music in a different way. So I'm not sure, but I mean, when the opportunity arose for us to be the band that this indie label took over there, we definitely capitalized on it. And I had to quit. The only reason I was in NEIT was because I needed a high school diploma. So
you needed that certificate.
So I got that, and it was right around the end of my freshman year of school. Well, when I was about to get my associates, that I just wasn't, same thing. I wasn't into it. It was like high school. I'm like, I don't really want to be here. Like, this is boring, blah, 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 blah. And I was hungry to be on the road and like making music full time. So I talked to my mom and I said, hey mom, I'm miserable and I have this opportunity to go to the UK and do this tour. And she was like, sounds to me like this opportunity to tour in the UK might not ever present itself. Like this is a good opportunity, and school, they'll always be here and
When
happy
you
to
come back and do school, you may not be able
Exactly.
to have to be able to do this.
Yeah, so she was very supportive in that, and then I went to the UK, and that was with another option, and we would do more UK tours after that. But I think what made us go to War Games, and it essentially was the same members. For the most part, we just rebranded because we had named the band when we were kids. We had developed a reputation that was great, but also there was stuff that wasn't so great with it in terms of like, we put out some records where we barely knew how to play our instruments. You know what I mean? So for us, it was like, oh, wait, we get the opportunity to kind of rebrand and kind of clean off the slate and start from fresh and start from new.
Those early records, were you... Because I know you were learning video and audio production. We don't have to get too deep into it, but I just feel like this is going to come into the later part of our conversation. Were you recording that at somebody else's studio, at like a professional studio, or were you trying to do it like yourselves, or?
No, I mean, don't get me wrong, the first couple of records that I did as a kid, they were recorded by us, but after that, I soon quickly realized that this type of tech is extremely difficult, and if we want the band to be taken seriously when people listen to our music, then we're going to have to shell out the money to record in professional studios with professional engineers. And we did. We sold cars. We took shitty minimum wage jobs and saved up money and did everything that we could to record decent sounding recordings, because that's kind of your product as an artist. And so, I mean, nowadays it's different. Like lo-fi is cool and indie is more accepting of.
I was gonna say, what year was this when
quality?
you were like, hey, we have to?
I know it was before 2012.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
but we had actually, as kids, we saved up a bunch of money and went and worked with an artist that we idolized. So we got it. We were like, yeah, we're gonna work with this artist. We're gonna do co-writes. We're gonna do the studio stuff. But basically, I left college and went on that first UK tour, which was awesome. And then I got back and never went back to college. I was just like, I want to tour the UK more. And so we rebranded. And the year that we rebranded, we got an opportunity to play on Warped Tour, which was great.
Ask about that, because that's a big like Vans. I don't know if it was called Vans Warped Tour at the time, but it eventually became Vans Warped Tour because like the branding and everything.
Yeah.
But like Warped Tour is like it's got a name and a pedigree and a prestige and a history behind it. Like that's a major tour to be on. How did you score that? And was that like an oh shit moment where it was like, oh, this has become like we're on this major tour now? Like was that a shock to the system, because then you're going from like driving
there was no
around,
shock because we had worked really hard to get on it. So after the first UK tour, we came back to the States, and the label, that small indie label that we were working with, they were like, hey, we want to do Warped Tour. And so we bought a van, 1,000. No. We had a bunch of vans at the time, but we like throughout the years. But we got a van. We drove to California, and we got on the tour. And basically, the indie label had a tent, and basically, we won a competition to play Kevin Says Stage in Massachusetts. But the indie label set up a tent and asked us to man that tent all summer long, selling records from releases from that indie label. Including our own. And we thought it was a great networking opportunity. We wanted to get our foot in the door, so we knew that we had to go out there and kind of grind and be at the very bottom to work our way up to potentially playing the tour. So that was a shock when we toured. We set up a tour. We toured all the way to California. We got on the tour. I don't even think any of us had gone to California at this point. So. And this was probably 2009, I think.
You were saying you set up a tour. Like, what was? Like, I can only imagine the logistics of like figuring that out and having to like call promoters, call clubs, call places ahead of time. Like,
well, MySpace was a beautiful thing, and this was right after MySpace. But MySpace really created this beautiful network where it was literally you messaged a band from, you looked at the map, and we were touring with maps when we first started. But we would look at a map, we would figure out a route, and then we would say, all right, well, these are the towns that we probably gonna want to play in. Like, this is a college town. Like, this is a town. Like, we obviously don't want to play in literally the middle of nowhere. But we'd look at a map, we'd pick some towns, and then we would go on MySpace and look up bands from those towns. We would kind of creep them on MySpace to see what kind of followings they had, what kind of music they were making with their friends and
So you're
and
doing
followers.
market research.
Yeah, but through MySpace at first, and then that quickly evolved into Facebook. But it was kind of the same thing. It was just kind of like it was message these bands. Maybe you'd message 100 bands and 5 would get back to you, and then you would sort of network with these bands. Like, you would have conversations and have dialogue and set up these shows.
Was everybody in the band doing that, or were you like the more entrepreneurial one and you took that on?
That was me. That was me doing.
So you're
that.
the one taking that on, and
Yeah,
really,
I feel like everybody
put that
had their
together.
jobs and everybody had their specialties, but that particular thing was mine. And
Gotcha.
I've booked tours since then. I've booked tours in the United Kingdom, so I've booked shows that were successful in other countries, and I really feel like what it comes down to is like knowing play a million bad shows, and then you're gonna have like a set of red flags. You're gonna be like, well, why did this show suck so much?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I just recognized the red flags and put in the work, which was having conversations with band people. You can literally mitigate your risk if you talk about all the potential things that can go wrong and have develop these relationships with the people that are booking these shows. And then it became the only bad shows we played were maybe the ones that something outside the realm of our control happened, or maybe it was like, we just needed something a Tuesday in the Midwest. Like, you got to play on a Tuesday night, but you know what I mean? Like, there's no avoiding a bad show on a Tuesday night.
So was it through that touring grind that you made the connections that led to the Warped Tour?
Yeah, so
getting onto
when
that?
we got on Warped Tour, we slaved. We were driving 10, 12 hours a night, getting 3 hours of sleep just to be at a tent all day, and we had to hustle. Like, at first it was tough. Like, the first night we didn't even make enough gas money to get to the next Warped Tour date.
So wait, hold on. Just because I want to possibly dispel a myth, because it's like, because I feel like people might think like, oh, Vans, Warped Tour, and possibly even touring in the UK, like the person putting on the tour takes care of everything, right? And that does not seem like to be the case here.
Well, that first year that we did Warped Tour, we didn't know nothing about it. So, like, we weren't even affiliated with Warped Tour. We basically got our foot in the door by working for a label.
And then that label had a 10 at Warped Tour, and they're like, hey, help us sell your record, but a bunch of other records.
Exactly. Okay. Help us make enough money to get to the next date. And that's all it was about. It was completely utilitarian sort of.
But I think that's the thing I want to kind of dispel here is I think people like think that, oh, you're an artist on this tour.
It's glamorous when you're at the top.
But like, you just have to show up and play because you're on the bill. Like, you don't have to fork over any costs, or you don't have to worry about that. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It's like, no, like, we're part of this tour. We get the cosign, but we're not getting funded, right? Like, they're not funding you or anything.
Well, I mean, nobody, Kevin Lyman or anybody involved in the tour didn't even know us. Like, we were nobodies. We were essentially employees of a company. And once we got the hang of things and realized that we got to hustle our records, we actually got really good at hustling our records. And now, look, Warped Tour, even though we're only playing one day, we looking at it as a beneficial investment of our time and effort and money, because once we got good at it, we were selling hundreds of copies of our CDs a day over a 2-month, month and a half long full U.S. tour. Like, if you're a band sitting at home playing local gigs, you're not selling 100 records a day across the country.
So the way you saw the tour, or the way the tour worked for you, wasn't like this moment of like, I'm on this tour, mama, I made it. Like, I don't have to do anything. Like, no. I'm getting a nice fat check. Because I think that's what people think. They think it's like, hey, just because you're on the bill, you're getting this nice fat check. And it's like, no, like, really the people that are top tier are doing that. Everybody else has to grind.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that was, it's like, okay, we got to grind. We're not getting everything taken care of. Like, we got to figure out, like, we're getting the cosign, but that's pretty much it. Mm-hmm. But now it seems like you eventually figured out, okay, we're on this tour. How do we use this tour and the cosign as a tool to help our own ambitions? Like, how do we flip it that this is like, how can we leverage this situation to benefit us?
Yeah. And not only were we out there now having a platform and hustling 100 CDs a day and getting our music heard all over the country, but we also had an opportunity to network with people in production and people who were at the top of the food chain. The beautiful thing about Warped Tour is it's like, sure, there's this hierarchy of the main stage artist and the side stage artist and the artists that are just there and trying to get their foot in the door. But at the end of the night, there's a barbecue. And at the barbecue, that hierarchy's thrown out the door.
Everybody's mingling with everybody.
Everyone's mingling with everybody.
So it gives you a chance to network and see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Little John was, one night he was like dishing up cocktails. And one night I'm drinking margaritas with the singer of the All American Rejects. It didn't matter if you were, what level you were on.
That separation went away.
Yeah. And it was a beautiful opportunity to network because we gained friendships with people who otherwise maybe we would never be in the same circle as. So there was a lot of benefits to being involved with the tour. And from like 2009 to 2012 was our first opportunity to play legitimately on the tour. And that was the year that we rebranded to War Games. So it was perfect timing.
When you say legitimately, like the tour was now directly paying you a paycheck and you didn't have to worry about stuff, or
no.
What was the difference? Because you say legit, I just want to see what the separation was.
Prior to that, we were winning competitions and getting opportunities to play a stage here or there, whereas in 2012, we got the opportunity to play 27 dates. And it just so happened that we rebranded to War Games, and we looked at all the things that didn't work and did work with another option, and we changed the name to something that we thought was a little bit more mature. And we set up a business plan and rebranded. And actually, before we did the official rebrand, we already knew that we were getting on 27 Dates of Warped Tour. So we were able to launch the rebranding of the band, the new band War Games, with 27 dates on the band's Warped Tour.
Loving the grind. When Kyle was talking about his journey in the music industry, there were two things I noticed in our conversation. The first was that he wanted his life to be about music so much that he truly loved the grind. Even in the beginning, Kyle, with no expectation of getting paid, offered up his friends in his car as roadies for another band, which led to him going on the road. From there, he loved the grind of touring and playing shows, even when the venue or the promoter were not so great. He then took that knowledge of playing so many shows, both good and bad, and turned it into a love for the grind of booking and running shows on his own, both in the US and abroad. Finally, even when his band was able to be a part of Warped Tour, he developed a love for the hustle and grind of selling records and merch. Now, the second thing I noticed was that throughout our entire conversation, Kyle never mentioned being in love with the superficial stuff that comes with being a successful musician. So, take a lesson from Kyle. Avoid loving the stuff, the superficial, the destination, and instead, develop a love for the work, the grind, the journey. Now, with those 27 dates, did how you all worked and like the logistics and the business and how you got paid, like, did that change and how did that change?
It did change. So I'm trying to keep these stories short because I've got lots of crazy stories, but like the way we got on the stage was basically another small indie label that we had been networking and met through Warped Tour out of New Jersey had hit us up, and they were like, hey, listen, you give us $1,000, we're going to get you on 4 dates on this stage. And at this point, I'm like very eager to rebrand and like sort of desperate to get on this tour that we'd been working so hard on for so long. So I was like, sure.
And they're like, all right, so it's some pay to play.
It was pay to play, but that is actually against the rules at Warped Tour.
Which I was going to say, like, how does Warped Tour feel about that? Because I'm pretty sure that they're like,
I didn't know.
Do that.
I didn't know, but I said, I didn't care. I said, I'll do whatever it takes to get on that stage because I'm tired of busting my ass on this tour and watching bands around me get the break. And like, I'm
Now, were those
I
other
want it.
bands getting the break because they were doing the pay-to-play thing? Like,
No.
like was Vans like officially?
No.
Okay, so it
Bands
wasn't like
were not
Vans.
paying to play. Bands never pay to play Warped Tour. It's very much against the rule, and it's against what I imagine everything that Kevin Lyman stands for. And when he started the tour,
Gotcha.
And I didn't know that at the time. So,
But there was like a gray market shadow economy going on. Apparently,
yeah. So I got this opportunity, right? He calls me up, and I'm like, okay. So I get off the phone with him, and I'm like, okay. At this age, and considering our lifestyle, we are young kids. We're working at like Dunkin' Donuts and stuff, because we're touring most of the year. So we're just looking for jobs to hold us over to the next tour, so we're living in a very unique way, and we don't have money. So $1,000 to me at that time, it might as well have been $10,000.
yeah, we got to raise the funds somehow.
Yeah, so I agreed to do it, and just thinking that, I gotta capitalize on this, and like I'll find the money. So I talked to the band, and there was another company on Warped Tour that we had been befriending and networking with and created sort of a rapport with throughout the time that we were out there. Like we would help them sell their stuff. Like we were just in networking mode, like trying to do favors for people, trying to be seen. Anyway, they were a much bigger company, and they were very successful on Warped Tour. And so I said, you know what? I've kind of developed a relationship with these guys. I'm going to call them up. They were from Staten Island, New York. And I'm like, I'm going to call them up, and I'm going to ask them for $1,000. I'm going to ask them for a loan. I'm going to, you know what I mean? I'll tell them that we'll hustle the $1,000 back for them on the tour. So I called them up. Hey, we got an opportunity to play. It's going to cost $1,000. I'm just calling to see if maybe you would loan us $1,000 and we could pay you back throughout the tour. And the owner of the company on the phone, he goes, yeah, I like you guys. I like your music. We'll do that for you. But I'm a little concerned because this sounds a little shady. Let me look into it first, and then I'll call you back. And so he calls me back the next day. He's like, and he drops the ball. He drops the info on me. He's like, yo, dude, that's totally against the rules. And now I feel like a dick because I asked him, and I'm like, shit, man, I didn't know this was a shady sort of thing.
Now you're just wondering, like, oh, fuck, now what happens?
Yeah, exactly. And he goes, so I did some research, though, and I figured out what was going on. So basically, according to him at the time, he said that the stages are sponsored by companies. Obviously, Hurley stage, the Kia Soul stage, whatever it is, right? The company sponsored the stage. The company sponsoring pays a large fee to sponsor the stage because it's essentially a billboard. And the company also gets to choose which artist to play on the stage. So it's actually like Kia Soul who decides that Yellow Card is going to play on their stage.
Probably because they're like, hey, we want a band that can either align or won't screw with what our brand stands for.
Probably. And so he goes, the stage that you are going to potentially, that you're looking to play on is called the ourstage.com stage. Was a company called ourstage.com. And they're the main sponsor of the stage, and then they also sell sponsorships for the stage that are not the main stage. So, like, if you the most expensive sponsorship of a stage allows you to name that stage after your company, the Kia Soul stage or the ourstage.com stage. And then there's other smaller tiers of of sponsorship for $15,000. You can be the next tier of sponsorship where you get the most branding on the stage and you get all these other sort of perks that allow you to advertise your business. And so he goes, what I found out was the person who offered you this spot on 4 dates is planning on purchasing the $15,000 sponsorship of the stage.
$1,000.
And then he was farming it out to other bands.
Basically, it's almost like some pyramid scheme shit.
Exactly.
Like, hey, like I'm gonna get you on this stage, even though it's against the rules, and it's like,
yes.
Well, how are you gonna get this on stage? So he was like,
farming it out, and he was going to make a profit from it.
So basically, he's
free advertisement and a profit.
So basically, he somehow got that $15,000 tier, even though he didn't hand the money over yet. Because I'm thinking like not everything's cash on demand, like you can invoicing and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, hey, Sunday, maybe he put up a little bit of money as collateral. And then he's like, all right, I'm gonna go to these bands that are struggling and get them to do some pay to play. Not only that'll fund that when the time comes, like, hey, I got the money, or like, hey, give me a little bit. I'm gonna get the money, and I'm gonna make a nice little profit for myself off of it too.
Yeah, it was definitely shady. I just want to say this too, though. I don't fault him. I don't think he was a bad person. I honestly think that he was trying to help artists. He was trying to help bands and get them on the platform. by doing something that he didn't have enough money to do and that his company didn't have enough money to do. So although it was shady and it was against the rules, I just want to mention that I think his heart was in the right place. And, you know, it costs a lot of money to start your own company and have it be out on Warped Tour and be profitable while it's out on Warped Tour. And we all have the goals of sort of being the Kia Soul, being the big companies and the big brands and the big bands. And a lot of times when you're working really hard and you're hyper-focused on accomplishing something, you will do whatever it takes. You know, we were just as guilty as him in the fact that, like, I was offered it. I thought it was sketchy, but I said, fuck it, I'm going to go for it because I'm Mama Bird in this. I'm going to do anything for my band and my thing, you know what I mean? Whatever it takes.
So I think this is actually, I was going to say this question for later, but since we're on the subject, I'll ask it now, and I think it's a good segue kind of like going into like the post-war games life and like the more businessy
but I also
side
do
of
have
things
to.
you do.
I have to tell you how we got the stage.
Okay. Oh yeah.
Real
Let's
quickly,
go into that, and then I'll ask the question.
Yeah, real quickly. So he tells me that this shady thing going on, and I'm like, oh damn, sorry. And I was like, sorry about that. And he was like, no worries. He was like, what I did find out is he hadn't paid the $15,000. So we paid the $15,000, and you guys are going to play all 27 dates.
So when he says we paid the $15,000,
His company ended up paying the $15,000 to sponsor the stage, which gave them the ability to choose what bands that, because it was supposed to be one band playing 27 dates. He was farming it out to other bands, so giving bands like 4 dates here, 4 dates there.
So the guy that came up to you was all right. So I just want to make sure I got the situation right. The guy coming up to you hadn't paid the $15,000
no,
yet.
he was in the process of like
paying
getting the bands
together and trying to pay it. So then the other person that you went to, just to remind me and remind everybody else again, that other person though was not the same as the first guy. So this other person, he had a separate business.
Yeah, he had a much more successful business, and so.
And they were trying to get the same stage, I guess, and he just saw an opportunity, or
no. So I called him up and asked him for the $1,000 to pay this first cat off.
Oh,
and he was like,
and then he's like, something sounds weird about this,
and then he did his own investigation.
He finds it out, and then he goes, well, shit, I've got a business that needs promoting. I've got more than $1,000. I'm just going to pay the $15,000. I'll get you, and I'll do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
which was beautiful because I went from feeling like a dick to him being like, "Nah, I did I did my own little investigation. I found out what's going on here, and I'm gonna. Not only am I gonna pay the $15,000, sponsor the stage, and choose you guys to be on the 27 dates that the stage is existing on the tour, but I'm also going to invest another $15,000 into pressing your record and printing your merch."
I was wondering, like,
$30,000 investment.
Was he already planning on doing that, or was that like just on a whim?
Because, it was on a whim. It was on a whim.
Insane. That's luck. I was gonna say that's the stars aligning. That's
Mm-hmm.
not, I don't want to say luck, but that's just like
it was on
things
a whim,
going your way.
Especially because he invested $30,000 into War Games. They did, the company, but also they had a lot of expenses. Like they lived on buses while they were on the tour. They had a 2-tent spot, which was like a rent of $500 a day. Like they had a lot of
the name of that
expenses.
company one more time.
They were called Self-Made Co. But prior to, they had rebranded from Selfless Murder to Self-Made Co. And then things would happen eventually because of the tour. But basically, they took out a loan, essentially.
It's a clothing company, right? Because I came across this in my research. Is that how you got involved with Self-Made Co? This will come into play later on.
Yeah. That's how I got involved with them. Because they took out some loans, got some extra money together to put us on the tour, and I am forever grateful of Joe Ionelli of Staten Island, the owner of Self-Made Co, and the sacrifices that he made so that War Games could play, and the things that he did for me. I think Joe was a great friend of mine, and he believed in me. And just being out on the tour and working my ass off. Like people saw us working our asses off. You know what I mean? And they had a respect for us, and we quickly deemed the nickname the hardest working band in showbiz. So he saw how hard we worked, and he said, "You know what? If I invest $30,000 into these guys, I might see an ROI."
Is Self-Made Co still around?
No. So this is relevant. This is very relevant to the story because he invests $30,000 into the band, and the deal is we're going to use our tour van to help bring some of his crew and get some of his crew, because the bigger guys in the company were renting bus spots, and the smaller guys in the company were basically getting a spot on our van to get venue to venue. And then also,
kind of like almost what you did with when you got your first thing, where it was like, hey, I have some resources I could offer up in exchange. I want ...
real estate inside of our trailer. We didn't need to have gear because Warp Tour had a back line of Orange stuff because Orange sponsored the tour, and but we still carried a trailer around full of their stuff. They had merchandising in a 16-wheeler. 18-wheeler rather. They also rented spots off in the bus trailers, and then our whole trailer was their tents, their merchandise. So we had a little deal going on right there. And then also 2 members of War Games would man the War Games tent, and 2 members of War Games would actually sling and hustle Self-Made Co. merchandise under the Self-Made Co. tents.
Did you end up getting like a co-owner gig or something with Self-Made Co. eventually, or?
So I started doing like PR, and I started sinking my teeth into the company because
because they'd helped you out so much.
They helped us out, and I wanted to help them out,
the proximity thing too,
exactly.
Right? Okay.
It was kind of like at that point we felt like sort of a family. You know what I mean? Like Self-Made Co. was helping fund War Games and have us out there, and they printed beautiful merch, and we had our records printed, and they were doing so much for us, and I wanted to keep that going, and I wanted to help them, and I didn't want to go back to working at Wendy's or Dunkin' Donuts or dishwashing when I got back from tour. I wanted to remain very much in this world because I felt like that was more beneficial for me from a networking standpoint. You know what I mean? If you're going into Wendy's working 40 hours a week, or you're washing dishes for 40 hours a week, you're not doing anything for your side hustle. So for me, it was like, if I get involved with this company, I get to live in this world, and I get to, I think I get to make more connections that could be beneficial to my side hustle.
So I'm going to use this opportunity to ask that question I was going to ask, and as opportunity to pivot. So I wanted to ask, because I was going to wait till later, but I think it makes sense asking it now. When it comes to like the music industry and the music business in general, whether you're on the performing side, or you're on the more logistical side, the more executive side, it seems like that. And I don't think it's just because it's a industry where like creativity and like art is involved, but something about the music industry, and I want to get your take on this, where it's like regular business practices go out the window, or the idea of pay to play and interning for free, like things that would not hold up in other industries or even other creative industries, are like commonplace, or it's almost like, and then on top of that, it seems like no one, I want to say no one, but not a lot of people have like the incentive to change that. Is that something you've experienced? Why, and if so, why do you think that is?
I think a lot of where the music industry is right now comes back to the moment the music industry fell, which was Napster, right? Before Napster, I feel like the format for the music industry was similar to Hollywood, right? So there's a lot of money pouring into the industry. There's tangible products being sold. There's a hierarchy. There's unfortunately people being taken advantage of. Pretty much like the music industry, in my opinion, was showbiz. Like every artist had to look good to get on MTV, to be on the radio, to whatever. Like you had to, the label had, the record labels were so powerful, and they had so much say, and they had such a big hand in everything. And then Napster came around, and it took the tangible product out of the industry, which was how the record labels were making the most money. It took all the power from record labels. It flipped the industry upside down, and things changed so much to the point now where it's like you have to be super innovative and super creative and have endurance and the ability to get knocked down a million times and be able to get up. You have to have all these skills to live within the music industry now, because it's constantly had these moments where it goes from sort of being structured and being this well-oiled machine to getting flipped on its back and then being the Wild West.
So my question about that though is and I want to hold on to the Napster thing because it leads to my next question, but just a quick sidebar. the pay to play and like things like payola and this like kind of like gray industry, shadow industry existed way before this kind of digital transformation of music happened. So just kind of dig a little deeper. Like, do you think that's just something ingrained in the history of the music industry? Because if you really go back, like the modern record industry was started by the mob.
Yeah.
And like the mob, like, so is it just more like that's ingrained and it's just like, because it's so like a part of the DNA of it, it's very hard to like get away from that? Or
I don't know. I don't even really know if it exists.
Because like payola
like
was happening
anymore.
in the 50s and stuff like that. Like, so maybe not payola the way we think about it back then is happening now, but there's like new versions of it. It seems like the music industry more so than other industries, maybe Hollywood is the only other one I could think of, where it's like, that's fine. Because there's other creative industries where like you try and pull that shit, like no one's going to work with you. But for some reason, it seems like in the music industry, that's how the way things are done. And that's fine. It's like, why is there always new versions of that?
Yeah.
And I just didn't know how, like, like from your experience, because we're going to get into this a little bit. You've been on both sides of the glass, so to speak. So I'm just wondering like what your take on that was, or like why that is. Because I think that's something really interesting about the music industry specifically.
Yeah. Well, it's in my opinion, you know, it being sort of this Hollywood showbiz type of environment, and then being flipped on its back and turning into just decades now of Wild West. We don't, technology evolves so rapidly. I think the music industry has really had a difficult time putting their finger on, how exactly they're going to make their money. And, things keep shifting and changing. So I right now, I think it's utter chaos. And I still think that it's utter chaos. I mean, it went from CDs to downloads to streaming to insert the next new technology. And I feel like I don't know that basically, because it's the Wild West. In the Wild West, you climb the ranks and asserted your authority.
Yeah, it's just like, it's like lawless.
Yeah, it's lawless. And I feel like the music industry is still lawless to the point where
it's just a new type of lawless. Like we went from the lawlessness of like the mob, then payola, then this, and now like technology got thrown in the mix, and now it's just like the lawlessness has evolved, but it never went away.
Yeah, it's like the mafia, but the bosses have been falling. And it's just chaos now. It's a power grab. Who do we listen?
It's a power grab now.
Absolutely, it's absolute chaos. And I just want to state that I think blockchain technology solves this for the music industry. Just wanted to. I know it's kind of a random note.
No, I agree. That could be a whole other podcast. But I'm glad you're on this because two things. One, and this is from my days working in tech. One of the things that I learned, and one of the things that we were telling other industries was like, hey, it was kind of like a buzzworthy catchphrase that we were told by marketing, but it was sort of true. Hey, digital transformation is going to happen. Like every industry and every job's going to undergo digital transformation. I think the pandemic kind of accelerated that even more.
Yeah.
But what I think is interesting is looking back with the power of hindsight, and it's something I noticed because I went to Full Sail, and I noticed, and I have another question about this later on about how not even on the consumer side, on the making of music side was changing. But looking back on that, I noticed, the music industry was the first major industry, in my humble opinion, that went through the digital transformation.
Yeah.
Like if you were smart, you should have seen what was happening in the music industry at the time and going, okay, maybe my industry won't have that exact thing happen, but like how that got rocked by technology, my industry is probably going to get rocked by technology. So like, how do I like learn from that thing? So I think like the music industry was the first one, the first like major industry to be affected by digital transformation. It's still affecting it now, but like the first one where you saw it in real time, like in recent history. This is not something we're reading about, like we're living through it. So with that being said, you then eventually, and we're going to talk about that too, is I guess like the second half, you did go into business for yourself, right? Was it because of the changes in the music industry and like Napster and like this disruption that caused you to go down a different path? Because I guess the question is, what made it so that why wasn't it the romantic ideal of like, hey, I'm in this band and we're going to make the band its best and we're going to live off of music and da-da-da. You're still in this band, you're still making some kind of income, but like that's not your main source, and your main source is now more on the production side. And like I think this is a good segue to talk with it. What what led to that decision? Was it more of a decision that you made? Was it you saw the tea leaves, like you saw things coming down the road and you're like, this isn't sustainable? Like, what led to that decision?
Well, so I was grinding with my band War Games for about a decade, and we were doing European tours, UK tours, full US tours. We did the Warped Tour thing for 6 years. We sort of sacrificed our financial livelihoods and our normal lives to chase the dream. And I was that type of person who just believed that if I worked harder than everybody around me and everybody that I knew, that I could work, that hard work alone would get me where I wanted to be. And that unfortunately didn't happen, for whatever reason. You know, maybe the music wasn't that great. Whatever it was, it didn't happen. And then after being a band for 10 years and sort of being in the trenches with the band for so long and putting all that stuff aside, people got tired of it. Like, we got really stressed and tired of like constantly touring and constantly not knowing what
So it's just the grind in and of itself.
Yeah, we got tired of it. And so the band went on hiatus, or broke up, if you will. At that moment, it was what defined me. And it was very difficult.
What was your life?
It was my life. And it was as if like I lost everything that was associated that defined me, because like even I come home.
Well, you were saying before you wanted to stay in that world, and then all of a sudden that world that you knew was
Self-Made
gone.
Co. wasn't a thing any longer. They went out of business essentially.
And I think you were doing merch for another band as well, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm guessing that went away too.
Yeah, Motionless in White.
There we go, Motionless in White. And so that went out. So that all kind of like not just one aspect, like everything, like that gone. And was that more of like? Well, just after a while, you just like were like, I can't sustain this, or like the band, like, or I'm guessing other members in the band too, because it was probably
it was a perfect storm of things, which led to a situation where I was coming home from tour, like I've always came home from tour, but this time there wasn't opportunities fresh in the works, and I was going to be home for a little bit, and the band was kind of breaking up, and I came home and I was depressed. I was kind of upset. I didn't really have this thing anymore that sort of defined me. And it was just like, I'd wake up, I'd go to the coffee shop, and I'd bump into somebody and they'd be like, "What are you doing, man?" Like every time
I thought you're touring and da-da-da.
Yeah. And it was just kind of like these constant
da-da-da.
reminders that I'd failed. And it was really depressing. And it was a perfect storm, because it came around the same time as like, you know, kind of like you know you're becoming irrelevant, and you're kind of working, you're failing, and you're very hungry, and to the point where like being hungry in the world and in business and in whatever you're trying to achieve is good, but there's a threshold that you pass where you're hungry for too long, and what you are is you're starving. And when you go from I'm an artist who's hungry for success to an artist who's now starving, you start to kind of lose your mind.
Especially when you got to taste it before.
Exactly. And I actually drove down to a studio in New Jersey to work with an artist that I'd worked with through War Games, and who I really looked up to and idolized. And I told him that I was hungry, and he completely knew. For some reason, he knew exactly where I was in my life, because he said, "Kyle, you're not hungry. You're starving." And starving isn't good, because right now he's like, picture yourself like you're a coyote in the woods, and you were hungry, and that hunger was motivating you to sift out any opportunity to get something to eat. But now you're starving, and you're actually working backwards. Like, you're kind of losing your mind. You are not sharp. You don't have the ability to hunt anymore. You're probably going to wander these woods until you die. And he looked me right in the eye, and this is somebody I grew up idolizing, and he said, It's time to hang your hat and get like a different job, or maybe be a studio musician, or maybe try to get into somebody else's band. But you're starving. You ain't gonna catch anything out in these woods.
You need to make some. Who was that person's name?
Ace Enders. He was in a band called the Early November, which is an emo band that, you know.
Was that a hard truth to hear of somebody telling you like, hey, you have to switch it up now. You can't do the thing that you were doing before.
It was that moment, I'll never forget it. It was as if he grabbed a knife and just stabbed me. Like, it was not what I was prepared to hear. I was prepared to hear the usual, oh, you can make it. You know what I mean? Like,
you can keep doing it. Like,
you can do it. Don't give up.
Pushing in this direction.
But it was incredible. It was profound advice. I was not ready for it. It hurt. And I drove 8 hours to South Jersey, showed him the songs that I wanted to work on with him. He listened to them. He gave me very knowledgeable critiques. And then he said, you don't look so good. And then we had this conversation, and this is where he kind of dropped these truths on me. And I said, okay. And then I got in my car, and I drove 8 hours by myself home back to Massachusetts, just reiterating those lines in my head that he had said to me and thinking about it. And then I got home, and I was depressed, and I just felt like I was wandering the earth with I just didn't know what the hell I was going to do, you know? And it was very tough because everybody around me knew me as this person. I had this thing that defined me, and now I no longer was doing that. People didn't even know what to talk to me about.
I think that's maybe the danger of, like, when you, even outside creative, when you let your job define you.
Yeah.
Because then if that gets taken away, then it's like, what have I been doing? Who am I? Especially the longer you do it. And I think it's also maybe a perception thing too. And maybe you weren't looking at it like that then, but like, you're still involved in music now, just in a different way, but you're still like living in the dream in the sense of like, you're part of the, like, not the original world you wanted to be in, but you're still part of it. It's just in a different way. And
but it's coming around full circle, man, because I got back, and I remember the first job I got back was, I hit up a buddy. I was like, yo, I need a job. And they got me a job delivering auto parts. And I'll tell you, working at an auto parts store and delivering auto parts is a terrible job because nobody ever walks into like an auto parts store in a good mood. Happy.
Like something broke.
Yeah, so it was incredibly depressing. You know, it was a mom and pop place. It was ran very old school, meaning like the managers and bosses, like their move was to instill fear into you and make you feel like you were worth nothing so that you would be an obedient employee, kind of what they did in the 50s and 60s, but people kind of like aren't about that anymore. Now, like the way to manage a business is to be motivating, give your employers stake in the company and give them a skin in the game, and like, you know, which I think is great. And I'm glad that there's been a shift. But anyway, I kind of like went back 100 years, got this job, and it was very depressing and it was very shitty, and I wasn't going anywhere, and I was just kind of like this lifeless, depressed sort of person for years, kind of clawing at opportunities to get back into the music industry. But what happened was a good friend of mine, I would even say a mentor of mine, Rich Ferry, who was a film person, he was a fan of war games. I had started working with him on a solo project because he had a studio on his free time, and we developed a relationship. I idolized this dude. He's so brilliant and he's so motivated, and I was just like, man, this is such a great person. I just want to be around him all the time. He's so motivated. He's so great at like being a freelance person, and he gave me the opportunity to get my foot in the freelance filming world. And he basically, and it was through weddings, actually. He was filming these really high-end weddings. Like, I can tell you great stories about meeting the Clintons at weddings, and like Gerard Butler, and all these were super high-end Newport weddings, because we're obviously really close to Newport, which is a massive wedding industry. I was
going to say, for those that are outside of the Northeast and don't know, Newport, Rhode Island, Newport was like way back in the day the playground of like the elite, the ultra elite of America, like mansions upon mansions that have been used in movies. But a lot of movie stars and music stars still like to go and hang out in Newport, Rhode Island. So
yeah.
So having that proximity or being close enough to Newport. Okay, continue. Yeah, just wanted to put that out there.
So he starts teaching me how to use the new cameras, and he starts getting me to do tasks that are time consuming, like culling through hours of wedding footage so that he can basically get a Final Cut project that is all the best shots, and he can kind of deliver his final product. So I'm kind of like an assistant in that sense, and I'm going to the weddings as a second shooter to get different types of B-roll footage. Like, I'm just dipping my toes like an intern into the freelance world through this film stuff. But for me, it was really beneficial because I was honestly getting to spend time with somebody who I idolized and thought had such control over his life and everything, and I was aspiring to be freelance. So I did that with him. I quit my 9 to 5 and did that with him. And then wedding season was over, and he was like, "All right, I don't need you anymore." So that's when
It's like, okay, then what?
Yeah, and that's when I was like, I've had a taste of freelance. I am not going back to the 9 to 5 auto parts gig. I am now I'm going to start recording full-time, artist full-time. And that's when I started my grind at the studio and started that.
Now, I have a question about that. So during all this time, because you were learning how to do audio editing and video editing, in high school, you learned about more video editing. Were you still keeping the blades sharp when it comes to audio editing? 'Cause there's probably still some stuff that like once you learn it, you don't forget it. Or like, did you have to like relearn and hone your skills all over again?
Yeah, I had to relearn and hone my skills all over again, but also technology had evolved. Like, and when I was in
A lot.
yeah, I forgot which version of Cubase I was using in high school, and then in college I was using Pro Tools HD7, and at this point, like technology was evolving so rapidly that I felt like it was new. I was in a lot of studios. I was on a lot of video shoots. Like I didn't feel disconnected from it.
You were around it though
Yeah.
too. You may not have been doing it, but you can like pick up certain things. And I want to
Yeah.
ask about that later because I think that plays into another question. But you didn't open up. We're gonna get there, folks. Don't worry. You didn't eventually open up. Like you eventually opened up your own studio, but you didn't start with that because you worked for Surreal Universe and Level Exchange.
Yes.
Were those like the two things that kind of like got you back into the game as far as like
So Surreal
freelance
Universe
work?
was a home studio down the road from my house that a buddy of mine had started, and I started working there a little bit, but it didn't really go very far. But I could see I was very client facing. I wasn't very engineer facing in that world, and I produced and whatnot, and it was pretty DIY. We weren't making enough money to support ourselves by any means, but Level Exchange is an interesting topic. So
if you could briefly, because I don't think Level Exchange is around anymore, at least not in the way.
No.
Okay, can you briefly describe what Level Exchange was?
it was Audio Tree.
and how you got into that and like what you did for them.
Yeah, so I am working for Rich Ferry. I'm fresh working with Rich Ferry. So the way we started it was
And who's Rich Ferry?
Rich Ferry is, I'm sorry, great. Rich Ferry is the gentleman, the buddy of mine who took me on as a freelance video editor and shooting assistant. And so he was very smart in realizing that like when everyone becomes a freelance person or a 1099 typically because they want to have control over their own schedule. They want to be their own boss, right? That's the dream.
Yep.
But then quickly you realize that like in a pursuit to gain freedom and control over your own schedule,
it's like
forfeit it.
You have freedom. You have freedom, but then it's like it's all on you. You have nobody else to blame. You can't blame your manager or the company. It's like it's on you now.
And if you're trying to start a niche arts-based business, it could literally mean forfeiting your freedom and spending every waking moment of your life trying to get this thing up and running.
Because now you can't just do the art anymore. Now you have to be like you're your own self-made business owner.
Exactly.
So you have to run the business as well.
He realizes this right off the get-go, and his move is to instill, which I think is a great piece of advice for anybody who's new to freelance. He says, all right, so it's kind of silly because even though I've started doing freelance to gain freedom and control over my life, the best way to start in the freelance world is to take things from the old school formal way of doing business and apply them to the freelance world. So he says, guess what, Kyle? I know we're doing freelance filming and everything, but you're going to work 5 days a week, 9 to 5. And I'm like, oh, like I'm used to. But it's silly because this is freelance. This is 1099 stuff. This is creative work. He goes, no. You're going to show up at my house at 9, and we are going to edit side by side till 5. We're going to grab lunch for an hour every day. It was just like working a normal job. But, that's the thing. Like you mentioned, when you start doing 1099 and you have all this control over your schedule, it becomes very difficult to keep yourself checked. And to get the work done that you need to get done. I mean, like not spending an hour organizing folders in Google Drive or whatnot, like
Right.
because you feel like you're being productive, but you're not actually producing.
Yeah.
And who's gonna have to answer for that lack of producing? You. And you'll have to you'll get a bad reputation. You'll let clients down. Yada yada yada. So anyway, I'm now going to his house 9 to 5. I forgot what we were talking about.
Oh, how did this get into Level Exchange? How did
He
this
gets
lead
an
you to Level
email
Exchange?
from a girl who's, I guess, freshly graduated from Bryant, I believe, University.
And also what Level Exchange was too. So those two things. How'd you get in there, and what
yes.
was it?
So he gets an email from this girl. She's looking for an audio engineer. He turns to me and he goes, "Hey, at the end of wedding season, you're going to need a job because I won't have work for you. Do you want me to do you want me to give this girl your contact information?" And at this point in my life, I'm starting to do freelance, but I'm still hungry. I'm still depressed and confused and kind of like feeling like I don't have any direction, or I don't have anything to really live for, I'm kind of just like clawing for every opportunity to get a job that makes me feel like I'm doing something creative or useful or whatnot, And so I said, yeah, sure. And so she emails me. We set up a meeting. It's great. She's a Bryant grad. She's got this hunger. And I see an opportunity for me to get involved in a startup, a music-based startup. And so that's what Level Exchange was. So she facilitated investments. She hired a staff. And she gets this music startup. And what Level Exchange was is very similar to Audio Tree, where basically there's a film team. There's a beautiful space that she facilitated investment and had built in Pawtucket near the Guild. And it's a beautiful, they build out this beautiful space.
I do remember it, and then it was gone, and I was like, wait, what happened?
Yeah, it wasn't around very long. And, but yeah, so she facilitates this investment. She gets the space built. She hires a video team. She hires an audio team. We purchase thousands of dollars worth of equipment, and we start production. And it's basically like Audio Tree. Bands are showing up from all over the Northeast. And they're performing live with like sophisticated audio equipment that I'm running, and there's a film team filming, and we're putting together this product of basically a live concert, essentially.
It's an end-to-end shop, at least from the live concert, because it's like we have a venue, we have a professional audio and video team, and so we can you can take the recording and probably make it into a live concert, album or whatever. Also, we got the video. You can use that for promo. ... So it's we're an end-to-end service basically. It seems like. Okay.
Yeah. So the concept was fantastic, and had we have known that a mutated influenza pandemic was gonna change the way we all lived. Had we had known that, I mean, this sort of product and this sort of experience would have been fantastic for COVID, because it digitized the concert experience.
Were they doing streaming at the time or no?
They weren't doing streaming, but I could have seen that being a healthy evolution of the
it would have made sense.
Yeah, but it was sort of YouTube based, and it didn't last long, unfortunately. And like most startups, it was just mismanaged. I think a lot of companies are started up where the person who's kind of behind the wheel is kind of out of touch with the demographic or the audience that they're trying to sell to, and things just don't get executed properly. They get mismanaged to the point where the ship sinks, and that's what happened with that.
So having that happen, and you were working there, how did you transition from that and seeing something being mismanaged to you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start my own studio.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh. Some of this is I have to be a bit diplomatic when I talk about this, because basically, in a nutshell, I think that company was sort of mismanaged, even though the intentions were gold. And while that ship is sinking, I befriend one of the investors of the project, and he can tell the ship's sinking. And I think he really did believe in the concept, and he was not ready to write this sort of thing off as a failure, and he was sort of ambitious in trying to make it work. Long story short, essentially, he started. I showed him my studio setup, which I don't know if people know, but basically I had no money when I came back from tour, and when I started a studio, I didn't have a space to start a studio. So at the time, I think I was living in the city in Fall River. I didn't have a space where I could make noise. So my uncle, who's an RV tech, he was getting rid of a 1976 Jayco trailer that was complete. It was a mess. It was going to the junkyard. It was full. It was waterlogged, and it was ready for the junkyard. And he said, "Hey, I'm gonna throw this away. Would you want this for any reason?" My grandfather was actually like, "Before you throw that away, you should talk to Kyle because he might want to make something out of it." Because my grandfather was brilliant, and he shows me, and I'm like, "Yeah, actually." And so I had constructed a studio space out of a trailer, a 35-foot long trailer, with the intention of just creating a space for myself to make music, to be loud in. The trailer was kept in Westport, where I currently live, which is not the city.
I was going to say, because so you didn't bring it, I was going to say you're probably renting, I'm assuming, in Fall River. You can't just bring a trailer onto a parking lot or any old property.
Yeah.
So you were living in Fall River. So were you working on the trailer in, what was it, Westport again? Was that?
Yeah. So my grandfather owns a piece of property in Westport, and it was off the beaten path. It wasn't, it's acres of land. So keeping the trailer there, and my grandfather was always so supportive of everything. He would come to my gigs, everybody knew him. He was he's just an incredible person, and he was incredibly supportive and just a music lover. And so he was absolutely A-okay with me having this trailer and making all sorts of noise in it.
Because he had enough property that it wouldn't really affect him, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, I built it with recycled materials because I literally had no.
All right, everybody, and that's it for this episode of the Creative Capital Show. But before we wrap up for today, just in case you missed the full title of the episode or if you didn't see the cover art, this is part 1 of a 2-part episode. So if you're wondering, hey, things ended abruptly, or I must have missed the part where Kyle talks about running and operating Railroad Park Recording Company, don't worry, you didn't miss anything. Kyle was just dropping so many gems during our conversation that to try and fit everything into a single episode would honestly be an injustice. And, it wouldn't benefit you, the listener, as much as it would if, broken up into 2 episodes. So again, this is part 1 of 2. You didn't miss anything. In part 2, we're going to get into the story of Railroad Park and just all the trials and tribulations of running that business. So thank you for listening. And Kyle, thank you for doing this episode. And for those that are listening, I hope that you come back for part 2. Thank you. And with that, let's cue the music. The Creative Capital Show is hosted, recorded, edited, mixed, and produced by me, Jason Sylvia. You can listen to The Creative Capital Show over at our website, creativecapitalshow.com. We're also available on Anchor FM, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all other major podcast hosting platforms. If you like the show, please subscribe. Helps the show out a lot. And be sure to follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show, and until next time, keep on creating.